The most feared man in the city followed a little girl across the street because she was the first person who ever looked at him and saw someone worth saving. I still remember the way everyone moved when I entered that room. Conversations became quieter. Smiles became careful. People watched every word they said because they knew my reputation before they knew me. My name carried weight, and I had spent years believing that was enough. Respect was something I had learned to measure by distance. The farther people stayed from me, the safer I felt. Then a little girl walked through that same room and changed everything. Her name was Lily, and she was holding a small folded note in her hand. She looked up at me with the kind of confidence most adults had lost years ago. She did not hesitate. She did not ask if she was allowed to speak. She simply said, "I need you to meet someone." For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood her. People usually approached me with carefully prepared requests. They wanted favors, answers, or protection. Nobody simply walked up and gave me a direction. "Who?" I asked. Lily looked toward the window across the street. Through the glass, I saw a small neighborhood restaurant filled with warm lights and ordinary conversations. Nothing about the place matched my world. There were no people trying to impress anyone. No one was watching for the next move. It was just a place where people came to eat, talk, and feel normal. "Her," Lily said. I looked back at the child. "Why do you think I need to meet her?" She paused for a second, like she was choosing the simplest words possible. "Because she sees people." That answer stayed with me. I had spent my entire life surrounded by people who saw what I represented. They saw influence. They saw authority. They saw the person they believed I was supposed to be. Very few people ever looked beyond that. I did not know why a child believed a waitress could see something everyone else missed. I only knew that something about her certainty made me curious. I followed Lily into the restaurant. The woman behind the counter looked up as we entered. Her brown hair was tied neatly in a bun, and she wore a simple waitress uniform. She looked like someone who belonged to a completely different world than mine. But when her eyes met mine, something unexpected happened. Nothing changed. She did not become nervous. She did not suddenly become overly polite. She did not look at me like I was someone she needed to impress. She simply asked, "Can I help you?" I had heard thousands of voices in my life. I had heard people agree with me before they even understood the situation. I had heard people tell me what they thought I wanted to hear. But that simple question felt different. "You know who I am?" I asked. She studied my face for a moment and answered honestly. "Yes." I waited for the reaction I was used to seeing. It never came. "And you are still asking me if I need help?" I asked. She gently placed a cup on the counter and said, "A name does not tell me everything about a person." Her words were quiet, but they reached deeper than I expected. Lily smiled beside me. "This is Emma." I looked at Emma again, trying to understand why this ordinary moment felt more significant than any important meeting I had ever attended. I walked into that restaurant expecting to find someone who needed something from me. Instead, I found someone who wanted nothing except the truth. I did not know it then, but that small encounter would become the beginning of the hardest lesson I ever faced. The world knew me as a man who had everything under control. Emma was the first person who made me question whether I truly understood myself at all. I thought the hardest part of being powerful was carrying the responsibility that came with it. I was wrong. The hardest part was meeting someone who did not care about the power at all. After I left Emma's restaurant that night, I expected the feeling to disappear. I expected her words to become just another conversation I had forgotten. That was how my life usually worked. People entered my world, they said what they needed to say, and eventually everything returned to normal. But Emma was different. She did not leave me with an answer. She left me with a question. For the first time in years, I found myself thinking about what someone saw when they looked at me. Not my name. Not my reputation. Me. The next morning, I returned to the restaurant. I told myself it was because Lily had asked me to check on Emma. I told myself it was simply a matter of responsibility. But I knew the truth. I wanted to understand why a waitress with nothing to gain from me was the first person who had ever spoken to me without fear or expectation. When I walked inside, Emma was carrying a tray of coffee cups to a table near the window. She noticed me, but she did not rush over. She did not change her routine. She simply nodded and said, "Good morning." 2 words. Calm. Normal. Somehow, that bothered me more than if she had been nervous. "That is it?" I asked. She looked confused. "What do you mean?" "Most people react differently when they see me." Emma placed the tray down and looked at me carefully. "Maybe most people are reacting to what they think they know." I stayed quiet. In my world, silence usually meant someone was waiting for me to speak. With Emma, silence felt different. It felt like she was giving me space to decide what I actually wanted to say. "Lily seems to trust you," I said. Emma smiled slightly. "Lily trusts people who listen." That answer surprised me. I had expected her to mention kindness or generosity. Instead, she mentioned listening. It was a simple thing, but it revealed something about her. Emma paid attention to what people needed, not what they could offer her. Over the next few days, I noticed things I would have ignored before. She remembered customers' names. She noticed when someone looked uncomfortable. She treated everyone with the same respect, whether they were leaving a large tip or counting every dollar carefully. It was a small restaurant, but Emma created a space where people felt seen. I had spent years creating spaces where people felt careful. The difference stayed with me. One afternoon, I asked Emma why she was not interested in using my influence to make her life easier. Many people would have considered that an opportunity. She looked at me and said, "Because help that creates dependence is not always kindness." That sentence bothered me because part of me knew she was right. I had spent my life solving problems by taking control. I fixed situations. I made decisions. I removed uncertainty. But Emma saw something I had never considered. Sometimes control looked like protection, but sometimes it only prevented people from choosing for themselves. I wanted to argue with her. I wanted to explain why the world was more complicated than she understood. But the problem was, Emma did understand. She just measured strength differently than I did. That was the first time I realized our disagreement was not about power. It was about what power was supposed to mean. I walked away from that conversation carrying the same frustration I had felt before, but this time it was mixed with something new. Respect. Emma did not challenge me by trying to defeat me. She challenged me by refusing to pretend. And for a man who had spent years surrounded by people who always agreed, honesty felt more dangerous than any disagreement. I used to believe that people revealed themselves when they were under pressure. I thought fear showed you who someone really was. But Emma taught me something I never expected. Sometimes the truth appears when there is no pressure at all. It appears when someone has nothing to prove and nothing to gain. Days passed after my conversations with Emma, and I found myself returning to the small restaurant more often than I wanted to admit. I never told anyone why. I did not need to explain my choices to people around me. In my world, explanations were usually unnecessary. But Emma had a way of making me question things I had always accepted. She was not trying to change me. That was the strange part. She was simply living according to her own values, and somehow that made me notice everything I had ignored about myself. One afternoon, I arrived at the restaurant and saw Emma sitting with Lily at a small table near the window. Lily was showing her a drawing she had made. Emma listened carefully, asking questions and encouraging every detail. It was a simple moment, but I noticed something important. Emma gave people something rare. She made them feel important. I had spent years making people feel careful around me. She spent her time making people feel valued. That difference stayed in my mind. Later that evening, I asked Emma why she cared so much about people she barely knew. She looked at me and said, "Because everyone carries something they do not talk about." I looked away for a moment. That answer felt personal, even though she was not talking about me. I had built my entire life around never showing what I carried. "You think you understand people?" I asked. Emma smiled gently. "No. I think people show you who they are if you pay attention." I wanted to disagree, but I could not. My entire career had been based on understanding people. Reading intentions. Predicting decisions. Knowing when someone was hiding something. But Emma was not talking about strategy. She was talking about compassion. That was something I had never learned how to measure. A few days later, Emma asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Why do you think everyone is afraid of you?" I looked at her. Most people would never ask that. "Because they know who I am," I answered. She shook her head. "Maybe they know what they have heard about you." That difference bothered me. Because deep down, I knew she was right. Reputation was a powerful thing. It could protect you. It could open doors. It could make people respect you before they understood you. But it could also become a prison. A version of yourself that everyone believed except you. I started noticing small moments where Emma challenged the way I saw the world. When someone made a mistake, I looked for the fastest solution. Emma looked for the reason behind it. When someone disappointed me, I considered whether they were useful or not. Emma considered whether they were hurting. Those differences created a distance between our worlds, but they also created a strange connection. I was beginning to understand her, and that made me uncomfortable. Because understanding Emma meant admitting that some of my beliefs were incomplete. One evening, I offered to help the restaurant with a problem they were facing. It was a simple solution to me. I could use my resources and remove the difficulty immediately. Emma listened, then quietly asked, "Would you do this because it is right, or because you want to feel in control?" The question stopped me. Nobody had ever separated those two things before. I wanted to tell her she did not understand my world. But maybe the truth was that I did not fully understand hers. For the first time in a long time, I walked away from a conversation without feeling like I had won or lost. I walked away feeling like I had learned something. And that was new for me. Because Emma was not breaking through my defenses by force. She was doing something much more difficult. She was making me wonder why I needed them in the first place. I had spent years believing that the hardest truths were the ones people tried to hide from me. I was wrong. Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones someone calmly places in front of you and waits for you to accept. Emma had a way of doing that. She never forced conversations. She never raised her voice. She simply asked questions that stayed with me long after I walked away. At first, I thought that was what bothered me about her. But eventually, I realized something else. What bothered me was that her questions reached places I had carefully avoided. A few weeks after I first met Emma, something changed. The restaurant was no longer just a place I visited. It had become the one place where nobody treated me like a title or a reputation. That should have made me uncomfortable. Instead, it became the one place where I could breathe. But comfort did not mean everything was easy. Emma still saw the parts of me that I preferred to keep hidden. One evening, I arrived at the restaurant after a long day of meetings and decisions. Emma noticed immediately. She did not ask about my work. She did not ask what happened. She simply placed a cup of coffee in front of me and said, "You look tired." I almost laughed. Nobody spoke to me like that. People usually noticed what I could do, not what I carried. "You always assume you know what people are feeling?" I asked. Emma shook her head. "No. I just pay attention." That answer stayed with me because it reminded me of something I had forgotten. Being seen was different from being judged. But then something happened that changed the way I looked at Emma. A conversation outside the restaurant revealed a part of my life that she had not known. Someone from my past mentioned my name, and I saw the change in her expression. It was not fear. It was disappointment. That was harder to accept. Fear was something I understood. Fear was predictable. Disappointment meant someone had expected more from me. Emma looked at me and asked, "Is everything I heard true?" I wanted to give her the answer that would protect the image I had built. I wanted to explain the circumstances, the responsibilities, the reasons behind every decision. But for once, I stopped myself. Because I realized something. I had spent years explaining my actions without ever asking whether those explanations were enough. "My life is complicated," I said. Emma looked away for a moment. "Everyone's life is complicated, Vincent. That does not mean every choice becomes acceptable." Her words were not cruel. That was what made them difficult. She was not attacking me. She was holding me accountable. For the first time, I felt the distance between us grow. Before that moment, I thought Emma understood me better than anyone. After that moment, I wondered if she understood me too well. I left the restaurant that night without the usual certainty I carried everywhere. I was used to people either agreeing with me or challenging me because they wanted something. Emma was different. She challenged me because she believed choices mattered. Days passed, and I noticed something unexpected. I missed the honesty more than I missed the comfort. I missed the person who could look at me and tell me when I was wrong. But I also understood that trust was not something I could demand from her. I had spent years expecting people to accept the person I was. Emma was the first person who made me question whether I had earned the person I wanted to become. And that question followed me everywhere. I thought losing control meant losing power. I never imagined it could mean losing someone's trust. But that was exactly where I found myself after my conversation with Emma. For the first time in years, I was not focused on fixing a problem. I was focused on understanding the damage I had caused without even realizing it. The hardest part was that Emma had not walked away because she hated me. She walked away because she expected more from me. And somehow, that hurt more. I returned to the restaurant several days later, but I did not walk in with the same confidence I used to carry. I stood outside for a moment, watching through the window as Emma helped a customer, smiled at a child, and moved through the room with the same calm kindness she always had. She looked exactly the same. I was the one who felt different. When I finally entered, Emma noticed me. Her expression was polite, but there was a distance that had not been there before. That small change said more than any argument could have. "How have you been?" she asked. It was a simple question, but I could hear the space between us. "Busy," I answered. Emma nodded. I figured. I wanted to explain everything. I wanted to tell her that my choices had never been simple. I wanted her to understand the weight of the world I carried. But then I remembered something she had said before. Everyone has something they carry. That did not mean every choice was acceptable. So instead of explaining, I asked, "Are you disappointed in me?" Emma looked at me for a long moment. "I am disappointed in the idea that someone with so much influence thinks he has no other options." Her words stayed with me because they were not about my past. They were about my future. I had always believed people judged me by what I had done. Emma was judging me by what I chose to do next. That difference changed everything. Around that time, I noticed Lily spending more time at the restaurant with Emma. The little girl who had brought us together seemed to understand something I did not. She never saw our disagreement as the end of something. She saw it as a moment where a choice had to be made. One afternoon, Lily asked me a question while we were outside the restaurant. "Are you going to stop trying to make everyone listen to you?" I looked at her, surprised. Most adults would never speak to me that directly. But Lily had always been different. "Why do you ask?" I said. She shrugged. "Because Emma listens to everyone else. Maybe you should try it too." I almost smiled, but the truth behind her words was difficult to ignore. I had built my entire life around making sure my voice was heard. I had forgotten how much could be learned by being quiet. The next time I saw Emma, I did something that felt strangely unfamiliar. I listened. I did not offer solutions. I did not try to control the outcome. I simply let her speak. She told me about the people she helped every day, the struggles they carried, and the reasons she believed small actions mattered. Then she looked at me and said, "People remember how you make them feel, not how powerful you are." That sentence stayed with me. Because for the first time, I wondered what people remembered about me. The answer was not easy to accept. I had spent years building a reputation that made people respect my strength. But I had never asked whether they respected the person behind it. I left that night knowing something had changed. I had not repaired everything with Emma. The distance was still there. The disappointment was still real. But for the first time, I understood that earning trust was not about proving I was right. It was about showing that I could become better. And that was a challenge my power could not solve for me. I used to believe that change happened when people admitted they were wrong. I was beginning to understand that real change happened when people made different choices even when nobody was watching. That was the part one struggled with the most. Saying the right words was easy. Proving them through actions was something completely different. After everything that happened with Emma, I stopped looking for moments where I could convince her. I started looking for moments where I could show her. The difference seemed small, but it changed everything. I began spending more time at the restaurant without expecting anything in return. I helped where I could, but I stopped making decisions for everyone. I asked questions before offering answers. I listened before assuming I understood. It felt unnatural because my entire life had trained me to move first and think later. But Emma noticed. She did not praise me for it. She did not suddenly become warmer. She simply noticed. And somehow, that meant more. One evening, the restaurant became unusually busy. Emma was trying to manage several things at once, and I saw an opportunity to step in. My first instinct was to take control. I wanted to organize everything, solve every problem, and make the situation easier. But then I stopped. I remembered the look on Emma's face when she told me that help was not always kindness if it removed someone's ability to choose. So instead, I asked, "What do you need from me?" She looked surprised. Not because the question was difficult, but because it was unexpected coming from me. "I need you to trust that I can handle things," she said. That answer stayed with me. I realized that even my attempts to help could carry the same mistake. I was still trying to protect people by controlling the situation. That night, I learned that changing was not about becoming a softer version of myself. It was about learning when my strength was useful and when it was simply a way to avoid uncertainty. But just when I thought things between Emma and me were improving, another challenge appeared. Someone from my world approached me with information about Emma. It was not dangerous. It was not a threat. It was simply a reminder that my life and her life were built on completely different foundations. They questioned why I spent so much time in a place where nobody cared about my reputation. They suggested that Emma could never truly understand the choices I had made. For the first time, I found myself defending someone not because I wanted to protect my image, but because I respected who she was. However, when Emma learned about the conversation, she misunderstood my intentions. She thought I was still allowing my world to follow her. She thought my presence was bringing attention she never asked for. "Vincent, I do not need someone to stand above me and decide what is best," she said quietly. "I need someone who can stand beside me." Her words hurt because they were true. I had spent years believing protection meant creating distance between someone and their problems. Emma was teaching me that sometimes protection meant respecting someone enough to stand with them. I wanted to explain. I wanted to tell her that my intentions were different. But I knew intentions were not enough. Actions were what mattered. For the first time, I faced a choice that had nothing to do with power. I could return to the person I had always been, the person who solved everything through control. Or I could accept that trust required patience, humility, and the willingness to let someone see me without the armor I had built. I did not know if Emma believed in me yet. I did not know if the distance between us would disappear. But I knew one thing. I was no longer trying to change because someone expected me to. I was changing because I finally understood what I could lose if I stayed the same. I used to think the hardest thing a person could do was admit they were wrong. I was beginning to understand that the harder challenge was accepting that being right was not always enough. Sometimes the person standing in front of you did not need your explanation. They needed to see that your actions could finally match your words. After my conversation with Emma, I gave her the space she asked for. Not because I wanted distance, but because I was learning that respect sometimes meant stepping back. That was a difficult lesson for someone like me. I was used to solving problems immediately. I was used to making decisions before anyone else had the chance. But with Emma, every attempt to control the outcome created a bigger distance between us. So I waited. I continued helping at the restaurant when she needed assistance, but I stopped trying to become the person who saved every situation. I started becoming the person who showed up. There was a difference, and Emma noticed it. But noticing was not the same as trusting. I understood that now. One afternoon, I found Emma outside the restaurant after closing. The street was quiet, and the city felt different from the one I knew. My world was built around movement, decisions, and constant pressure. Her world was built around small moments that most people ignored. She was organizing supplies for the next day when she looked at me and said, "You seem different." I almost smiled. Is that a good thing? Emma thought about it. I think it depends on whether you are changing because you understand something, or because you are afraid of losing something. Her answer caught me off guard. Because the truth was, I was afraid. Not of losing influence. Not of losing control over situations. I was afraid of losing the one person who had ever looked at me without seeing a reputation first. I do not want you to think I am only trying to prove something, I said. Emma looked at me carefully. Then do not prove anything. Just be honest. It sounded simple. But honesty was complicated when your entire life was built around protecting information. For years, I had learned how to reveal only what was necessary. I had learned how to stay unreadable. Emma was asking for something completely different. She was asking me to be real. Before I could answer, Lily appeared outside the restaurant. She looked between us and immediately understood that something important was happening. Children often notice things adults try to hide. She asked, "Are you two still trying to figure each other out?" Emma smiled. I did not answer. Because that was exactly what was happening. We were not enemies. We were not strangers anymore. But we were not where we used to be either. We were somewhere in between, and that space required patience. A few days later, I faced a situation where my old instincts returned. A problem appeared that could have been solved quickly if I used my influence. For a moment, I considered doing exactly what I always did. Make a decision. Remove the uncertainty. Move forward. But then I thought about Emma. I thought about the disappointment in her voice when she told me she did not need someone standing above her. She needed someone standing beside her. So I chose differently. It was slower. It was more difficult. But it was the first time I made a decision without needing control as the reward. When Emma learned what I had done, she did not suddenly forget everything that happened before. She did not tell me everything was fixed. Instead, she simply said, "That was a choice I did not expect from you." It was not forgiveness. It was not a complete return of trust. But it was a beginning. And I realized something important. The goal was never to convince Emma that I was a good person. The goal was to become someone whose actions no longer needed constant explanation. For the first time in my life, I was not trying to protect the image people had of me. I was trying to become someone I could respect when nobody was watching. I used to believe that people were defined by the things they had survived. The struggles. The sacrifices. The decisions they made when there were no easy choices. But I started to realize that a person was not only defined by their past. They were also defined by what they were willing to change after understanding the cost of their choices. That was the lesson Emma had been teaching me without ever trying to teach me anything. She never asked me to forget who I was. She never asked me to pretend my life had been simple. She only asked me to stop hiding behind the reasons I had built around myself. As the weeks passed, the distance between us slowly changed. It did not disappear overnight. Trust was not a door that suddenly opened. It was more like a path we had to walk one step at a time. Emma still questioned me. She still challenged my decisions. But now, there was something different in the way she looked at me. She was not only seeing the mistakes I had made. She was watching the choices I made after them. One evening, I sat with Emma outside the restaurant after closing. The city lights reflected on the street, and for once, I was not thinking about meetings, expectations, or the endless responsibilities that followed me everywhere. I was simply sitting there. "Do you ever miss the person you used to be?" Emma asked. The question surprised me. I looked at the street for a moment before answering. "Sometimes." She waited. "Why?" I thought about it carefully. Because that person knew exactly what to do. He never questioned himself. Emma looked at me. "And now?" I smiled slightly. "Now I question everything." She nodded. "Maybe that is not a weakness." Those words stayed with me because I had spent my entire life believing doubt was something to eliminate. I saw uncertainty as a problem. Emma showed me that sometimes uncertainty was proof that you were finally paying attention. A few days later, Lily came to the restaurant carrying an old envelope. She said she found it while helping organize some things. Inside was a small drawing she had made the first day she brought me to Emma. It showed 3 people standing together. A little girl. A woman behind a counter. And a man standing slightly apart from them. I looked at the drawing and noticed something I had never seen before. The man was not drawn as someone powerful. He was not taller than everyone else. He was simply there. Part of the picture. Lily looked at me and said, "I wanted you to remember that you were not scary that day." I looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" She smiled. "Everyone else saw someone important. I saw someone who looked lonely." Her words hit harder than I expected. Because they were simple. Children did not understand reputation the way adults did. They noticed things people spent years learning to hide. That moment changed something inside me. I realized I had spent so much time protecting myself from being hurt that I had also protected myself from being understood. Emma had never been impressed by my influence. She had never needed anything from my position. She had only wanted me to see the difference between being feared and being valued. Later that night, I told Emma something I had never said to anyone. "I do not know if I can become the person you think I can be." She looked at me calmly. "That is not my decision, Vincent." I nodded. "I know." "Good," she said. "Because it has to be yours." For years, I had searched for ways to control outcomes. But this was something I could not control. I could only choose. And for the first time, that felt less like losing power and more like finally understanding what power was supposed to be used for. I was still Vincent. I still carried my past. I still had responsibilities that would not disappear because I changed my perspective. But I was no longer running from the person I had been. I was finally deciding who I wanted to become. I used to believe that changing my life would require losing everything that made me powerful. I thought becoming a better person meant leaving behind the person I had been. But I learned something different. Growth was not about destroying the past. It was about understanding it, accepting it, and choosing what came next. My life did not suddenly become simple after that night with Emma and Lily. The world around me did not change because I changed. People still remembered my name. They still remembered the reputation that came with it. But the difference was that I no longer allowed that reputation to decide who I had to be. I started making choices that surprised people around me. Not because I wanted their approval, but because I finally understood the responsibility that came with influence. Emma noticed the difference, but she never treated it like a victory. She never looked at me as if she had fixed me. That was one of the reasons I respected her. She understood that I was responsible for my own choices. She had simply been the person brave enough to show me that I had another option. One evening, I returned to the restaurant where everything began. The same warm lights filled the room. The same familiar voices surrounded the tables. But I was not the same person who had walked through those doors for the first time. Emma was behind the counter, organizing a few things before closing. She looked up and smiled. "You are early today." I smiled back. "I thought I would try something new." She raised an eyebrow. "What is that?" "Showing up without needing a reason." Emma laughed softly. It was a small moment, but it meant more to me than any public recognition I had ever received. Because it was normal. It was human. And I had spent years forgetting how valuable normal moments could be. Lily came running over with another drawing. She handed it to me proudly. This time, I noticed something different. The drawing still had 3 people in it. Lily, Emma, me. But this time, the space between us was smaller. I looked at her and asked, "Why did you draw us like this?" She answered immediately. "Because people stand closer when they trust each other." I looked at Emma. She smiled, but she did not say anything. She did not need to. Some things were better understood without words. I thought about the person I used to be. The man who believed fear was protection. The man who believed control was the answer to every problem. The man who thought being untouchable meant being strong. I was not ashamed of that person. He had survived the only way he knew how. But I was grateful I did not have to remain that way forever. Emma never asked me to become someone else. She simply reminded me that there was more to me than the role everyone else had created. The world still saw the same name. The same suit. The same presence that made people pause when I entered a room. But now, I understood something I had never understood before. Power was not measured by how many people feared you. It was measured by what you chose to do when you had the ability to take the easier path. Years later, when I looked back at that first meeting, I realized Lily had never brought me to Emma because she thought I needed someone to save me. She brought me there because she believed I was capable of becoming better. Emma saw something in me before I was ready to see it myself. She saw a person behind the reputation. And that changed everything. I spent most of my life trying to become someone nobody could challenge. But the greatest change came from the one person who simply refused to be afraid. Not because she was fearless, but because she believed every person had a choice. And for the first time in my life, I believed it too.